A camera doesn't lie. That's something we tell ourselves. A camera captures light, converts it into data, and stores exactly what was in front of the lens at that exact second. No imagination, no fear, no tired brain filling in shapes from shadows. Just light and math and truth. So when footage came back from the bottom of the world, showing something large, pale, and moving through the blackest water on the planet, something that didn't match any animal in any scientific database on Earth, the camera should have ended the argument before it started. It didn't end it. It opened something far darker, because the footage raised a question nobody in the room that day was prepared to answer. What do you do when the camera agrees with the witnesses, and the witnesses describe something that shouldn't exist? The Southern Ocean sits at the bottom of the planet like a cold, black ring encircling Antarctica, with no land to slow it down. Wind circles it endlessly. Waves here have crossed entire ocean basins without breaking on a single shore, and by the time they lift a ship, they carry the momentum of thousands of kilometers behind them. Sailors who've worked every other sea describe this one differently. They lower their voices. The latitude bands here earned their names over centuries of ships going south and not returning. The Furious 50s, the Screaming 60s. Those aren't poetic nicknames. They're warnings written in the logs of dead men. Beneath those waves sits a world humans have barely touched. In 2025, 2 major research expeditions pushed into these waters with remotely operated submarines and came back with 30 new species science had never seen before. 30 in a single expedition, including a carnivorous sponge, now called the death ball sponge, covered in tiny hooks that trap and dissolve living prey. They found hydrothermal vents over 2,000 feet deep that nobody knew existed. They filmed coral gardens in complete darkness that have been growing for longer than recorded human history. The scientists who led those expeditions said the Southern Ocean is still extremely undersampled. The scientific way of saying we've barely looked, and every time we do look, something unexpected turns up. We have better maps of the surface of Mars than we have of the seafloor beneath these waves. More people have walked on the moon than have descended to the deepest floor of the Southern Ocean. That's not an exaggeration. That's the simple arithmetic of how little we've explored the place where this story happens. Into that darkness over the past 2 decades, something specific has been seen. Not by one person, not in one place, by multiple crews on separate vessels in different years describing the same animal with the same features in the same waters. They call it the Ningen. The word is Japanese and it means human. That's the detail that makes this story impossible to walk away from. Not monster, not creature, human. Because the thing these witnesses keep describing doesn't look like any known animal in the catalog of Antarctic wildlife. It looks, they say, like us. Enormous, pale, built on a vertical plan, with a rounded mass at the top that suggests a head, a broadening below it that suggests shoulders, and at the waterline, something that moves the way a limb moves. Not a flipper held flat against a streamlined body, but something that articulates, something that swings loose and slow the way an arm hangs when you're standing waist deep in still water. Now, before we go any further, let's be completely honest about where this story came from. The Ningen, as an internet legend, traces back to a Japanese message board called 2Channel around 2007, where anonymous users described whale research crews encountering pale humanoid figures in Southern Ocean waters. That origin matters. The most vivid images circulating online, the ones with 5-fingered hands, forward-facing eyes, and a mermaid tail, are almost certainly fabricated. The sharpest portraits of the Ningen are illustrations polished by years of retelling, until the legend hardened into a face. Honest investigators have to name that up front. A significant layer of this story is manufactured mythology. But here's where it gets complicated. Underneath the manufactured legend, before the internet images and the forums, there's an older record. Crew members on Japanese research and fishing vessels were describing something pale and enormous in Southern Ocean waters before any viral image existed. Those earliest accounts aren't dramatic. They're flat and technical, the same tone a mechanic uses when a sound in an engine doesn't belong. They don't reach for drama, they reach for measurements. Investigators who study witness credibility will tell you that's the exact register of someone who has seen something real and is trying to communicate it accurately rather than impressively. The witnesses who've contributed to this file aren't tourists on a cruise deck. The people who work the Southern Ocean are professionals in one of the most demanding environments on the planet. A fisheries observer on a commercial vessel spends months at sea handling the animals of the far south. He knows a fur seal from a leopard seal at 100 meters. He knows the blow pattern of a minke whale versus a fin whale. His entire professional value depends on not being fooled by what the sea shows him. A man like that doesn't report a pale giant in the water lightly. He reports it because saying nothing and carrying it alone has become worse than the embarrassment. When a trained observer tells you he saw something pale and enormous rise beside the hull and descend straight down, he's not doing it for attention. He's doing it because his catalog came up empty. The accounts that form the strongest part of this file share a specific cluster of features, not vague impressions, but specific details that show up independently across different witnesses who never compared notes before they reported what they saw. First, the color. Every account agrees on a whiteness that was wrong for those waters. Not the white of a beluga whale, which has a blubbery, almost glowing quality. Not the belly flash of a breaching humpback, but something smooth and even almost skin-toned in the way it absorbed light, like something that had spent its entire life far from the sun. Second, the scale. Estimates from trained observers cluster around 20 to 25 meters for the visible portion above or just below the surface, larger than most known whale species, approaching the length of the research vessels these people were standing on. Third, the absence of the markers that give away every known large animal of the Southern Ocean. No dorsal fin, no blow, no arching roll at the surface, no tail behavior consistent with any documented whale or seal. And fourth, the descent. Witnesses describe it the same way every time. Not a dive, not a tail flip exit, but a smooth, controlled vertical sinking, straight down, as if gravity had simply been inverted and the water closed over the spot without a ripple. That fourth detail is important. It's the detail the simplest explanations can't absorb, because it connects the eyewitness accounts to the most significant piece of evidence in this entire file, the piece that doesn't come from a person's memory at all. In the records of vessels working these waters during the years when the sightings cluster most densely, there are sonar returns, depth sounder records, the most basic and least exotic technology on any commercial vessel. These instruments bounce acoustic pulses off the seafloor and off anything swimming between the hull and the bottom. They're used thousands of times a day to find fish and to avoid running aground. Nobody uses sonar to hunt monsters. Sonar is bookkeeping technology. And yet, in these records, on at least several documented occasions in the deep water zones where the Ningen sightings are most concentrated, these instruments return something the operators couldn't account for. Not a school of fish, which paints on a screen as a loose, scattered cloud of individual returns. Not the solid, flat line of the seafloor. A single dense biological mass. One object, large, returning a strong, clean echo, hanging in the midwater column at a depth where nothing that size has any documented reason to be. And on one occasion, described in specific detail, that sonar contact did something a piece of drift ice cannot do, and a dead whale carcass cannot do. It changed depth. It rose. It held position. Then it descended again at a controlled, steady rate, vertically. Precisely the motion eyewitnesses had been describing with their own hands for years before anyone connected the two. A sonar contact isn't a story, it's a physical measurement of a physical object displacing water and reflecting sound. The instrument doesn't get tired. It doesn't fill in shapes from imagination. It simply reports that something solid is present at this coordinate, at this depth. And now it has moved. The object was large, not person-sized, not car-sized. The estimates put the largest of these returns at a mass measured in the length of a boat, something that on the sonar screen looked less like an animal and more like a submerged wall that had decided to move. Now, a responsible investigator doesn't stop there and declare victory. A sonar contact is real, but it's also mute. It tells you something large is there. It cannot tell you what. It cannot show you a face or a fin. It cannot distinguish an undocumented creature from a known animal in an unexpected location on an unexpected day. The instrument is honest, but it's blind in every way that matters for identification. So before we reach any conclusion, we owe this file the discipline of running every available explanation honestly and seeing which ones actually survive contact with the evidence. The first and most obvious explanation is ice. In the Southern Ocean, ice behaves in ways that look alive to the human eye. Enormous slabs calve from ice shelves and roll in the swell, showing pale bellies before they turn under again. Brash ice collects into forms the pattern-seeking human brain insists on reading as shapes. And ice is white, the exact white the witnesses keep describing. This explanation deserves genuine respect. For the majority of vaguer reports, the ones without specific duration or observed motion, ice is almost certainly the answer. But it doesn't survive the key reports. Ice drifts where the water and wind send it. It doesn't swim against a current. It doesn't descend at a controlled, steady, vertical rate and hold at depth. The witnesses who matter in this file describe motion that works against the sea rather than surrendering to it. Ice is ruled out not because it's impossible, but because it physically cannot do the specific thing the strongest accounts describe. The second explanation is the beluga whale, and this is the strongest card the skeptics hold. Belugas are genuinely pale, almost luminous white, and large enough that a brief surface sighting in poor light could plausibly be mistaken for something stranger than it is. The color matches perfectly. But then you open a map. Beluga whales are Arctic animals. They live at the top of the world, not the bottom. The Southern Ocean has never been their habitat. To make the beluga fit this case, you'd need to move an entire species roughly the length of the planet into waters where not one has ever been documented, stranded, photographed, or caught in any net in the history of Southern Ocean fishing. Not a single beluga carcass has ever washed up on an Antarctic shore. The color fits. The geography destroys it completely. The third explanation is the one science actually can't dismiss, and honesty demands we treat it seriously. An undiscovered large deep-sea organism. Not a monster in the folkloric sense, but a real biological creature that simply hasn't been formally cataloged yet. In November 2025, researchers returning from 2 expeditions to the Southern Ocean announced 30 previously unknown deep-sea species collected in a single season. 30 new species, from 1 expedition in 1 ocean. The deep ocean is the least explored territory on this planet. New large animals are still being formally described in this century. Giant squid reaching lengths considered impossible until bodies began washing ashore. Whale species unknown to science until DNA testing of stranded animals revealed they'd never been described. The idea that something large and pale lives in the deep Southern Ocean and occasionally rises toward the surface isn't fantasy. It is, if anything, the most scientifically conservative reading of the available evidence. But notice what that concession actually is. It doesn't confirm the humanoid figure of the internet images, with its forward-facing eyes and articulated fingers. It confirms only that the ocean is capable of concealing something large from us. That's a much smaller and much more honest claim. Which brings us to the footage itself, because this is what this case file is built on, and this is where we have to be most careful of all. In the years since the Ningen story crossed from Japanese internet forums into global awareness, footage has circulated. Video clips, images claimed to have been taken from research vessels and fishing boats in Antarctic waters. Some of it has been definitively traced back to digital artwork. Some of it traces back to photographs of known objects, icebergs at unusual angles, a beluga filmed in the Arctic and relabeled. Some of it simply has no origin anyone can establish. The internet is extraordinarily efficient at stripping context from images and attaching false labels to them, and the Ningen story has been used as a container for footage that has nothing to do with the Southern Ocean at all. But here's what the skeptics rarely finish saying, honestly. Identifying a piece of footage as fabricated doesn't erase the record that existed before the footage. Proving a photograph is a hoax doesn't make the sonar contact go away. Tracing an image back to a digital artist doesn't explain what the fisheries observer saw from the deck of his vessel before he ever heard the word Ningen. The manufactured layer is real, and the older record beneath the manufactured layer is also real. When you strip away the invented face and the internet mythology, you're not left with nothing. You're left with the original puzzle the legend grew on top of, a real sonar return, a real physical mass moving under its own control in water where nothing that large has any documented right to be. A real cluster of witness accounts from trained observers describing the same impossible features in the same impossible water across years and kilometers of separation. The most important development in this file isn't any single piece of footage or any individual witness. It's the direction science is moving. In 2025 alone, 2 major Southern Ocean research expeditions came back with animals nobody had imagined. Carnivorous sponges that hunt with hooks, new hydrothermal vent ecosystems hidden under 2,000 feet of black water, iridescent scale worms from the South Sandwich Islands that no laboratory on the planet had a category for. The scientists running those expeditions were explicit. The Southern Ocean is undersampled. The floor of this ocean remains less explored than the surface of Mars. New large animals are not impossible in this environment. Given the rate of new discoveries, they are statistically expected. What's also changing is the technology. More research ships are working this water every season than at any previous point in human history. Remotely operated vehicles with high-definition cameras are being sent to depths that were completely unreachable a decade ago. The A84 iceberg that broke from the George VI ice shelf in 2024 uncovered seafloor habitats that had been sealed under ice for possibly thousands of years, and the expeditions that moved in to study that newly exposed seafloor found ecosystems nobody had ever observed before. The Southern Ocean is right now being opened in real time. Whatever has been living in its deepest, coldest water is running out of dark to hide in. So here's where this file stands. As of right now, the most dramatic images are almost certainly manufactured. The internet version of the Ningen, the thing with the human face, the 5 fingers, the mermaid tail, is a legend built on a legend, shaped and sharpened by years of retelling until the creature became a fixed image rather than an uncertain description. That part of the story is folklore, and it should be treated as folklore, but when you remove that layer carefully, like lifting a painting off an older painting beneath it, what you find underneath is not nothing. You find a cluster of consistent witness accounts from trained professional observers describing the same unexplained features independently across multiple years and thousands of kilometers. You find sonar records from working vessels documenting a large, solid moving biological contact in deep water that no known Southern Ocean species can account for. and you find a scientific context in which 30 new species were formally described from 2 single expeditions in 2025 in those same waters, suggesting the biological inventory of the Southern Ocean is nowhere close to complete. The honest conclusion is not that the Ningen exists in the form the internet imagines. The honest conclusion is smaller and stranger than that. Something large is in that water. Something that moves in a way that doesn't match the catalog of known Antarctic marine life. Something that registered on sonar as a solid biological mass and then descended in a controlled vertical drop that no ice and no known whale behavior explains. It hasn't been caught, it hasn't been identified, it hasn't been cornered by the cameras now entering those depths in growing numbers. But the cameras are getting closer. The vehicles are going deeper. The expeditions are returning with things that were impossible last season. And somewhere down there, in water cold enough to stop a human heart in minutes, in darkness that doesn't lift even in the southern summer, something is still moving. Something pale, something large, something the instruments agree on, even when the witnesses sound too frightened to be believed. Let's talk about the footage specifically, because it deserves a direct and honest answer. Multiple video clips have been presented online as genuine camera captures of the Ningen. Some circulated heavily on social media platforms through 2024 and 2025. A few are extraordinarily striking. A pale shape, enormous, moving slowly beneath dark water, with a form the human eye immediately reads as a body built on a vertical rather than horizontal plan. These videos generate millions of views every time they're posted, because they appear at first look to confirm everything the witnesses described. A rounded mass at the top, a broadening in the middle, something below the waterline that moves the wrong way for a fish and the wrong way for a whale. Here's what makes the footage both compelling and frustrating. The best of these clips cannot be definitively debunked, meaning traced to a confirmed source, a digital artist, a misidentified known animal, a staged hoax. Some of the most shared Ningen footage has been traced back. One widely circulated 2024 video was identified as CGI, produced for an unrelated horror project, with the Antarctic label attached afterward by someone who had nothing to do with the original. That video is a hoax, full stop. But several other clips have no confirmed source, no creator has claimed them, no animation studio has recognized them, no marine biologist has identified the object as a known species at an unusual angle. The absence of a debunking is not confirmation. Something can be unidentified without being extraordinary, but it also can't simply be waved away. An honest investigator doesn't mark a file closed until it's actually closed. What investigators in cryptozoology and marine biology both agree on is that the quality of the conversation around the Ningen changed in late 2025, when the Southern Ocean expedition results were published. Because when scientists stood in front of cameras and said they'd found 30 new species in a single season in those same waters, and when they said the Southern Ocean floor remains less explored than the surface of Mars, the cultural atmosphere around the Ningen question shifted. The question was no longer whether unusual large creatures could exist undiscovered in that ocean. The question became what specific evidence would be required to formally document one if it existed. The bar was no longer impossibility. The bar became documentation. That shift matters for how we read the oldest accounts. If we now accept, as the 2025 discoveries demand, that large unknown organisms are actively being found in the Southern Ocean in this decade, then the fisheries observer watching something pale and enormous slide back under the surface wasn't hallucinating an impossibility. He was potentially observing something real that science hadn't yet named. The sonar contact that rose, held, and descended in a controlled vertical motion wasn't measuring a ghost. It was measuring something physical the operator had no category for. One is a delusion, the other is a data point. Think about what the deep Southern Ocean offers a large organism that wanted to avoid observation. The darkness is absolute below the photic zone. The water is close to freezing, which slows decomposition, so dead animals disperse rather than floating to the surface to be identified. The seafloor sits at depths remotely operated vehicles only began reaching regularly in recent years. Ice cover for most of the year makes aerial observation nearly impossible. If you designed conditions specifically to hide a large animal from humanity, you couldn't improve much on the deep Southern Ocean in winter. And we know this hiding worked. 30 species concealed there were formally described from a single 2025 expedition. The ocean kept them from us right up until the moment we sent a vehicle down to look.